Hi, good morning, everybody. We are going to do a live here shortly with some international experts, specifically on the political advocacy pieces that are critical in this historic moment for advocacy for Palestine globally. So I am just waiting to be joined by several leading global human rights practitioners and also civil society leaders inside Palestine. So just give us one moment as people join us here as we get started. So one moment, please. I'm going to be joined today by Craig Mochaiver, who's an international human rights lawyer and former UN human rights official. Also be joined by Lamis Deek, who is a Palestinian attorney and human rights advocate. And then we'll be joined by Ubay Aboudi, who is the director of the Bisan Center for Research and Development and is also a member of the Palestinian Non-Governmental Organization Steering Committee. So just give us a moment as folks join us here. Just gonna see where everybody is. For folks that are asking about the status of the people who were kidnapped by Israel in international waters and abducted and taken to Israeli prisons, Adala is the organization that is meeting with the prisoners, or not prisoners, sorry, the hostages, and is updating information. So please do make sure that you are following Adala, A-D-A-L-A, Adala, which means justice actually in Arabic. And they will be the folks that are doing this. So let me go ahead. I see the Bisan Center joining, and I think that is Obey. Let me see if he can join. Waiting still for Mr. Mochaiber to join. I don't know if I can. I've never done this live, so thank you for your patience as we figure this out. Obey, I'm trying to add you. Go live. Here we go. I'm trying to figure out how to add him. Obey, I see you. Excellent.
Hello, everyone.
Hi. We're waiting for Lamis and Craig Mochaiber to join us. And so we will, inshallah, get started here in just a minute. But actually, while we do that, just in the interest of time, I would love to ask you, Obey, if you could maybe talk to us a little bit more about kind of what is happening on the ground right now as we're waiting for Craig and Lamis to join us.
Okay, so after the H people sent their approval yesterday with also some remarks, and President Trump called for a ceasefire, complete ceasefire. Of course, the Israeli occupation and genocidal army did not abide by it. Since yesterday, we have had until a couple of hours ago, actually, I have not been updated. The past couple of hours, over 20 martyrs, 20 people killed, and those 20 people were killed, still bombed in their houses, in tents that are trying to flee the ongoing onslaught by the Israeli army. In the West Bank, the situation is not better. The Israeli occupation forces, which constitutes from the Israeli army and the Israeli settlers, are also continuing attacks on villages. Today I was in Farha village, which yesterday was the olive harvest farmers were attacked by settlers and protected by the army while they were stealing the very olives from the trees of the Palestinian farmers in Farha. Of course, starvation, famine still continue across the Gaza Strip. We have gone past the 400 people threshold dying of starvation in Gaza, man-made famine. Everyone remember that because of the Israeli siege, inhumane siege on the Gaza Strip. thousands of aid trucks are still waiting in Al Arish on the Egyptian side, and the Israeli authorities do not allow them in. Today we had the deaths of two more people, and actually also the situation is still deteriorating in this regard.
Am I on mute?
And now we see that Lamis has joined.
Salam everyone. Sorry, it's been a big runaround day. Hi Ubay. Samhini. And because I'm always late to your webinars. We're always running around. Ismik. I can't, there's no sound for me, Ayman.
No, it's fine. I muted myself because I have my little one running around. So Hazami, hi.
What is it again?
Hazami.
عاشت الأسامي حزامي الله يرضى عليكي. Last time I was on with them, Ubay, I was without water, without electricity, Wi-Fi was a mess. I was late, so good to see you. And sorry for interrupting. I'm very happy to be here. I'm going to go on mute and go off camera if that's okay.
Okay. So Ubay was if you don't mind continuing with the updates on the ground, that'd be great, please.
Yes. The situation continues to be dire in Gaza City. The Israeli army, although it scaled down a little bit of its attacks, but they are still continuing. The siege is still continuing. And it's evident that the Israeli government will only want the first phase of the Trump plan, which is getting their prisoners out of Gaza and then continuing its bombardment and continuing its siege and destruction. This is a critical moment. We understand now that also the Israelis will need to be pressured much more. We also understand the limitations of the Trump plan, and as Palestinian non-governmental organizations network, which constitutes 140 organizations in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, we have already voiced our rejection of the Trump plan because it's not built on justice. The Trump plan is actually built on the dispossession of Palestinians, the non-recognition of our sovereign right of self-determination, non-recognition of the refugee status of Palestinians and their right to return. So we are talking about a series of violations from the Israeli occupation.
Yeah, and that's really important. And I know there's questions that are coming in, and we'll get to that. Craig is having a hard time connecting to us here, and so I was just trying to get that worked out. I always say technology is one of the biggest blessings of our time. It's also one of the biggest curses of our time. But without technology and social media, we wouldn't have had access to the information coming out of Gaza and the West Bank, Palestine, highlighting the atrocities. So thank you for everybody for bearing with us as we iron out some of these technology challenges. But Ubay, I wanted to ask you, because there's some questions coming around what are people in Gaza feeling with the negotiations that are taking place?
Look, the people in Gaza have been through hell, and they have not been back yet. The situation is hell on the ground. We have famine. We have people that are displaced, entire families sleeping in the streets. Now, Israel has also prevented enough shelters, which is when we say shelter, we are saying tents, plastic tents or cloth tents from entering Gaza. So people and families are sleeping on the street. The street is overflowing with sewage because also the Israeli occupation forces have destroyed the infrastructure, the sewage system. There's a lack of clean drinking water for two reasons. The first one is Israel has limited the amount of water going into Gaza. And the second is that they bombed the desalination plants and water wells and water distribution centers. And the ones that are remaining are often contaminated from the sewage and from the garbage that Israel does not allow even Palestinians to dispose of. You need to understand that Gaza is a very small geography of land. It's only 365 square kilometers, and people are now 2 million people are now only put into about 10 to 12% of the total area. So we are talking about now at this moment the most densely populated area in the world, about 2 million people stuck into around 30, less than 40 kilometers, 40 square kilometers. This is a density, human population density that is unparalleled in any other place around the world. The people in Gaza, they want the genocide to stop. They want the genocide to stop. This is quite simple, quite straightforward. And if you ever heard people from Gaza saying that the genocide, that they welcome Trump's plan or they welcome this initiative because they think that at least the genocide will stop. Of course, we also understand that the Trump plan does not guarantee a permanent ceasefire, does not guarantee the unfettered access for humanitarian relief and humanitarian goods, the lifting of the siege, so that goods and doctors, infrastructure and equipment can go into Gaza to make it habitable and livable again. Gaza at this moment has been totally, not just the Gaza city, the Gaza Strip, when I say Gaza, has been totally decimated by 2 years of ongoing bombing, destruction, and siege by the Israeli occupation. And people also need to understand that even if the siege, if there's a complete ceasefire tomorrow and the siege is lifted, the people will continue dying from the actions that Israel has committed for years to come. The famine will not go away. The famine, because it has become a medical condition for the people. And actually, even the UN experts are warning against the feeding syndrome. When people that have been starved for too long are offered quantities of food, if they consume it without medical oversight, it can cause death. And this is already one of the warnings that the UN has issued about Gaza. As civil society, we are seeing that there's hope within the people that this will stop, but we know it will not stop on its own. It needs collective action. It needs going forward, and it needs uniting for peace. We still see the President Petro Guterres's Colombian president's proposal for uniting for peace at the UN General Assembly that will deploy multinational protection force for Palestinians is tantamount. And we understand as Palestinians that once things cool down a little bit in Gaza, the attack will start to escalate in the West Bank, as they have done in the previous ceasefire. You know, in the previous ceasefire, they displaced over 50,000 people from 3 refugee camps in the West Bank.
Well, that's a good segue. Craig, I think we were able to get you connected. Can you hear me, Craig? Okay, it says that Craig is here, but for some reason it's not allowing him to connect. Craig, can you hear me? Oh, I believe he's back. Here we go. Technology, a blessing and a curse. Craig, welcome. Welcome. This is Craig Mohiber, who's an international human rights lawyer and former UN human rights official. So Obey was just talking to us a little bit about Uniting for Peace, and there's multiple questions coming in around the role of the United Nations in this. You have been somebody who's been very vocal around member state and United Nations specifically failure to actually take action within legal frameworks that are available in order to stop Israel's atrocities and genocide and deploy support in order to halt Israel's aggressions and continuous aggressions. So with that, could you please update us what role, if any, is the United Nations playing currently in trying to facilitate any of the ongoing negotiations? Is there a role of the UN? That's one of the questions that has come through. And then also, we heard a lot about the Uniting for Peace during the UN General Assembly, and it seems like that conversation is not continuing in the public space with as much urgency as it was. So could you please brief everybody on specifically the Uniting for Peace and currently what is the United Nations doing in the current context? Thank you, Greg.
Yeah, well, parts of the United Nations are doing very important work. I would point to the heroic work of the UNRWA workers in Palestine, 370 some odd of them who have been murdered during the genocide, many along with their families. And yet the UNRWA colleagues continue to do everything they can to relieve the suffering of their neighbors. I would also point to the independent human rights mechanisms like the Special Rapporteur, Francesca Albanese, the Commission of Inquiry, others who are doing the job they're supposed to be doing without fear, despite the persecution that they are facing, all the way up to US sanctions and death threats from Zionist trolls and other offenses as well. That side of the House is doing very important work, but the political side of the House has dropped the ball entirely, mostly out of fear of powerful Western states like the United States, the United Kingdom, and Germany in particular, and the European Union as well. And, when last year the United Nations General Assembly finally did something meaningful in adopting a historic resolution in September of 2024 that said, in essence, that codified the decisions of the International Court of Justice, including the idea that the occupation is entirely unlawful, must end completely, that Palestinians have a right to return, that Israel is practicing racial segregation and apartheid, that Palestinians have a right to compensation, that Palestinians don't have to negotiate for their rights with their oppressor. All of these things, together with the provisional measures of the International Court of Justice ordering Israel to back off on Gaza, all of these things were codified in a resolution of the UN General Assembly in September of 2024. And it said, if Israel doesn't comply within 1 year, we will adopt further measures. Now, what happened with that threat was that Israel's allies, its Western countries and its Gulf allies and others got very nervous. And they started to create alternative tracks to make sure that Israel would not be held accountable and that Palestinians would not get increasing levels of freedom until liberation. And so what they did was the French and the Saudis, together with lots of other countries, got together and they put together the French-Saudi plan that became the New York Declaration, which includes many elements, even a few good ones, but includes some terrible things that basically mean a proxy occupation of Gaza on top of the existing occupation, increasing normalization of the Israeli regime, even as it perpetrates a genocide and practices apartheid, and no moves that are meaningful toward the liberation of the Palestinian people. That has gained a lot of steam with the endorsement of the New York Declaration by countries from across the globe last month. But that's a declaration, that's an endorsement. There are no mandates, no resolutions, no implementing measures adopted in that. It was basically something that said, we are going to get back to the situation that existed in October of 2023, where the Palestinians will be in an endless process of negotiating a two-state solution for an eventual Bantustan somewhere down the road, while Israel is increasingly normalized in the region and beyond, and Palestinian liberation is out the window. And by the way, no accountability for genocide, no accountability for apartheid. That's the French-Saudi plan. The Trump plan, which is the outside the UN approach of Donald Trump, a co-perpetrator in the genocide, I will remind people, is even worse than that because it doesn't have all of the niceties that are included in the French-Saudi proposal. It basically just says, we will take over Gaza. We will occupy it like a 19th century colony. We will exploit it for its resources. We will get countries to donate money. That money will be controlled by corrupt people like Donald Trump and Tony Blair and Jared Kushner. Literally, these are the names. And the Palestinian people can forget about self-determination, can forget about an independent state, even here. Even a Bantustan is not respected in the Trump proposal. And it came in a package that said, the resistance will accept this or we will continue the genocide in Gaza and beyond. So what folks have been doing in an effort to build a diplomatic momentum to create a meaningful alternative to those horrific proposals is to say, we know that nothing will get through the UN Security Council that is good for Palestine. That is just a fact. The UN Security Council includes the veto of the United States, the United Kingdom, and France, all three of which have been complicit in the genocide. And of course, the US, which has used its veto 50 times, 6 times during the current genocide in order to continue the genocide. will never allow anything to go through the Security Council, which is good for the Palestinian people. It is a co-perpetrator. It is a co-manager of the process of Zionist colonization of Palestine. The Security Council is out for anything good. Anything that did get through the Security Council is going to be very bad for the Palestinian people because of that reality. So what we did was we said, there are ways around the Security Council veto. And the most tried and true of these is the use of the so-called Uniting for Peace mechanism that allows the General Assembly to convene in an emergency special session when the Security Council is blocked by a veto and to take the kinds of action that normally the Security Council would take, including a call for sanctions, a call for a military embargo, a call for the withdrawal of the credentials of Israel in the United Nations, the reestablishment of the anti-apartheid mechanisms, potentially the establishment of a criminal tribunal, and the centerpiece, the mandating of a United Nations protection force to deploy to Gaza, ultimately to the West Bank at some point, but to deploy to Gaza with a very specific mandate, not to be a proxy occupation, but to deploy at the consent of the Palestinians, to remain only as long as tolerated by the Palestinians, and not to get involved in the governance of the Palestinians, which is none of the goddamn business of the United Nations or anybody but the Palestinians, but just to protect civilians, to ensure the delivery of humanitarian aid, to preserve evidence of Israeli war crimes, and to begin the process of reconstruction of Gaza by and for the Palestinian people. Not these proxy occupations of the French-Saudi plan or of the Trump plan, but a more liberationist approach to protection during a genocide. It sounds like pie in the sky, and to be sure, it is an uphill climb, and maybe even a long shot, but it is legal under the United Nations rules. There are precedents for it. In 1956, it was the UN General Assembly, when the Security Council was blocked, that deployed the UN emergency force to the Sinai during the height of the Suez crisis and helped in an ending of that crisis, and ultimately the withdrawal of the French and British forces and Israeli forces that had been committing aggression against Egypt at that time. So it's legal, it's in the rules, there's a precedent for it. The 10th emergency special session on Palestine is very easy to reconvene because it's never been fully adjourned. So any state can ask for it to begin again. So you don't have to jump through all the hoops of getting a majority of member states and so on and so forth. So it is entirely possible legally, and it's not impossible politically, because we know you need a 2/3 vote in this mechanism to get something through. But we know that resolutions on Palestine routinely pass with a 90% majority, as did this historic resolution that was adopted in September of 2024. The only thing that could stop this from happening is the fear of delegations to take it on. And here we've got very courageously the delegation of Colombia, led by the president of Colombia, Gustavo Petro, who has said we are going to do this, and who has announced it in the General Assembly in the high level segment. They've been doing their diplomatic due diligence and talking to delegations to get co-sponsors, which are needed. Ideally, you would have a sponsor and then cross-regional co-sponsors from various regions to introduce this into the General Assembly and to basically bring, and this is the strategic issue, basically bring this discussion out of the shadows of the United Nations in Turtle Bay into the bright light of public scrutiny through media and through the work of all of us, so that every delegation, every country is forced to say yes or no to the proposal for protection of a people facing extermination, which changes the political calculus for them. If they can make dark deals behind the scenes that get them off the hook, they will do it. But if they are compelled, some of them, to make these decisions publicly, then the hope is that that will help to change things. Now, every day that passes without this resolution getting the light, actually being introduced officially, is a real risk to this proposal. You can see the momentum that's being built around the French-Saudi proposal, which is disastrous. You can see the momentum just in a matter of a couple of days being built around the Trump recolonization or multi-layer colonization proposal, which is disastrous, catastrophic. Our momentum is much weaker at this moment. But once that resolution is distributed in a meaningful way, once there are co-sponsors signed on, you can convene the emergency special session within 24 hours. and compel countries to vote on it. Now, will it pass? Really tough to say at this moment. It's probably a flip of the coin, but yes, it could pass with the right momentum and with a good cross-regional group in all of this. And I will say it does not have to be presented as an assault on the French-Saudi proposal, for example. The French-Saudi proposal mentions a kind of protection force in there. It's a terrible thing. It's called a stabilization force, and its purpose is to keep an eye on the resistance and to secure Israel and to, stabilize and recreate what was effectively the cruel status quo that existed before October of 2023. So it's bad, but it does say, and all member states have agreed, that we should send some kind of protection force. So piggybacking on that, but providing a concrete proposal for a mandate is an opportunity to change it. What could stop it? The fear of delegations, as I said, the lack of support from the delegation of the state of Palestine could take this thing down in a day. Intimidation tactics by the US, which has not hesitated to use tariffs and sanctions and all kinds of bullying and abuse, economic incentives, you name it, in order to peel off delegations. So it is an uphill climb, but here are the stakes. This is something that exists. It's an existing power that could make a difference on the ground, not to defeat the Israeli regime in a military conflict, but to change the political calculus of the Israeli regime and the Americans, to change the incentive structure under which they're currently operating. Currently, they're operating under a structure of absolute, unrestricted impunity. They can do whatever they want, which explains why Israel is occupying Palestine, perpetrating a genocide, occupying Lebanon and Syria, carrying out acts of aggression against Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Iran, Yemen, boats in the Mediterranean, carrying out transnational terror attacks in Lebanon with the booby trap pagers, assassinating leaders all around the region, committing all of these crimes because it operates in a climate of impunity. And this is one measure that at the very least for Gaza itself could help to change the incentive structure if we can get the thing introduced and passed in the General Assembly. If we fail, all countries who oppose this will be on record as such. And we will have a lot of clarity, a lot of moral and political clarity on the role that they are playing. We at least, and one last word, I know I'm speaking too much, one last word. This has been requested by the Palestinian people, by Palestinian civil society, by Pingo, that Ubai has been so absolutely critical in helping to coordinate, by voices on the ground in Gaza, and even by the state of Palestine as represented in the United Nations, that has repeatedly requested it officially on the record in the General Assembly, in the Security Council, and in writing to those bodies and to the Secretary General of the United Nations. It would be consent-based. There's no Chapter 7. It can't become a proxy occupation force because it's only there at the will of the Palestinians. It's not imposed under Chapter 7. And it would include no colonial occupation from the Americans or the French or the Saudis or anybody else. I'm shutting up.
No, I actually wanted to ask you a follow-up question because several questions are coming in specifically asking can you pinpoint the actual delay of why has it not yet been introduced? I know, Lamis, you want to jump in here. I'll come to you next because I know you've been working on this very actively. Specifically, can you let us know what is the delay in introducing the resolution? And the question specifically is also being asked, what can be done to force for that resolution to be formally introduced?
Well, I think public pressure is absolutely key here. I mean, what is unique about this process is that it came from Palestinian civil society, and then it has been pushed by global civil society acting in solidarity with Palestinian civil society. It didn't exist until then. Nobody was going to do this. It got a sponsor in the Colombians. The Colombians are in an uphill climb. They're working, I think, as fast as they can to try to build co-sponsors, other states to support it. Otherwise, it will be dead in the water. And that's the process in which we are now. Now, I would also say that it needs to be formally introduced quickly because of the momentum that's building in these other more nefarious proposals. And we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. We can't wait until we've got a global coalition ready to move forward. Otherwise, it's just going to become a footnote in history. But we have to try. So the challenge is bringing along enough delegations, also bringing along the State of Palestine delegation, which, as you know, even though it's the state of Palestine is an entity represented in the UN and foreign policy is in the hands of the PLO, in fact, it is the Palestinian Authority and the leaders of the Palestinian Authority who overlap with those mechanisms, and they need to be also convinced of the importance of this initiative and the need to make sure that it moves forward. Lamis has been in the soup, and she'll be able to say a lot more detail on these things.
Thank you so much. Lamis, I wanted to kind of open it open-endedly, but I also have a specific question for you too, is that there's confusion a lot of people have if the Trump proposal does get accepted, what does it do to the Uniting for Peace resolution? And can you please speak to kind of what your average person, what can people do to push this forward? And obviously anything else you wanted to jump in on, but thank you so much for being with us, everybody. Go ahead.
You're welcome. So I just wanted to take a moment to introduce myself a little bit and kind of our role as the PAL Commission in all of this. So we've been the primary advisors to the presidential advisor on this resolution. We drafted a substantial portion of this. We've also been frontlining all of the diplomatic preliminary canvassing. So we've been the liaison between when it reaches, it's reached formal channels. We've gotten full legal approval. I think the absolute final on the language of the resolution, there's protocol and process in each government. And though this has been in discussion all over the world for a long time and also being discussed within the Colombian government, it wasn't until quite recently that we were able to pin down the resolution, agree to all the language, have it go through all of the protocols so that we have, we were canvassing without the final language. We are at the stage of the final language. And I'd like to begin with that final language. And I think that that's important for the world to know to begin, because certainly stopping the genocide, a national neutral force that has not been complicit with the genocide is a critical factor. But there are many other parts of this resolution that are not just critical, but make or break, and that will give us an idea of how this compares or relates to the Trump proposal and the French-Saudi proposal, and why it's so important that people normalize it. And I'd like to begin here, especially as people are asking what can we do and where we're at, and then I'll go into diplomatic updates, timeline, what we have in mind, what's upcoming from the Colombian government and how that process will be. But I'm going to begin with, Obey and Craig have brilliantly addressed the issues in vis-a-vis Gaza, but we're looking at a resolution that is far bigger than that. And I'll go back to the ICJ advisory opinion. The ICJ advisory opinion, we have the ICJ preliminary orders on the genocide, which is ceasefire, essentially, right? The ICJ advisory opinion comes in and it looks at the totality of the occupation. First and foremost, and this is critical, a critical talking point I want everybody to keep in mind moving forward. Number one, what the ICJ said was that this concept of facts on the ground, creating facts on the ground, under the premise and excuse of security is not only invalid, but we and the world should not recognize it. Those facts on the ground being the settlements, right? And all of the settler military infrastructure inside the West Bank and, of course, now inside Gaza. We have both, right? We have military structures, we have the operations. ICJ says that's gotta go, right? That's number one. The other thing, very critical, and this is falling by the wayside, this is so important, return. Palestinians in Gaza, over 75% of whom are refugees, the ICJ said they must return to their homes and they must receive reparation, restitution, and satisfaction. Palestinians are not beggars. Palestinians are not looking for donations. They are owed this. This is not negotiable, and this is not an ancillary or minor point. So I would say critically, look, as an attorney, I'm a practicing attorney for 20 years. I work with the PAL Commission on War Crimes, Justice, Reparations, and return to doing diplomatic and legal. I have never, in 22 years of lawyering, gone into a courtroom asking for what I want or less than what I want. And what the whole world is talking about in terms of how we're discussing our demands or Palestinian demands, we're just focusing on that. We have to, folks, everybody who is listening, please, we have to bring the negotiating start point to much higher than what the ICJ has said. Right? Right to return, restitution, reparations, dismantlement of all settler military infrastructure. This also means not only facts on the ground are invalid, Oslo is not only invalid, but Oslo itself is illegal, right? That Oslo itself was a farce. This is an earth-shattering, very clear. Now, all these principles have existed in law. They've been raised time and again in the ICJ 2004 advisory opinion on the wall. But this opinion in 2024, which was adopted in whole by the UN General Assembly in Resolution ES 10/24, adopted the entirety of the ICJ advisory opinion with a firm deadline of September 18th, 1 year later. And so the French-Saudi plan, the less sinister between the Trump plan, the French-Saudi plan acknowledges the land grabs made during the genocide, cements and shelters, right, the settlements pre-existing even before the genocide, including the military settler apparatus throughout the West Bank and Gaza. And to me, this is far more dangerous, right? Oslo is why we kept going back in this circle. This would bring us to a worse situation than Oslo. So people really need to please make notes, look into this. We can issue more. We've drafted statements. So I think it's very important for people to begin on those talking points. Now we'll move forward to the resolution addresses all of this. It's not just the genocide. It's not just the multinational force. It's the full dismantlement of the occupation, which over 140, I believe, something states signed onto when they endorsed UNGA Resolution 1024. I begin this to say, every government that has endorsed that resolution, i.e. an overwhelming majority of states, must and should endorse this upcoming resolution. How does it relate to the Trump proposal? The Trump proposal, set aside the fact that, okay, we're saying it's not in contention. The Trump proposal is, at best, we can conceive of the parts of it that will survive, right? At best, conceive of it as itself an interim measure. There is nothing that is stopping states or us from proceeding and submitting and therefore getting the endorsement on the Uniting for Peace plan. More important than anything else, nothing else will bring short-term or long-term peace. It doesn't matter if Trump and the Emirates and God knows who says, oh, the resistance has to disarm or you're not in office. That's not how things have worked in Palestine for 77 years, right? When it wasn't the Arab tribes before under the British, then it was the worker strike, and then it was this group and that group and Hamas. There'll be 100. It's not realistic. Nothing is going anywhere. Number one, it's also not realistic in terms of bringing peace. Can't count on the Israelis to abide by any solution. And we certainly can't count on the allies of Israel, which today, by the way, former employees of the Biden administration said they weren't only giving cover, they weren't only giving support, they were enabling specifically. That ship has sailed, that credibility has sailed, and the credibility of states who think they're going to push this line on the masses, not just in Palestine, but all over the world, that era has also come to an end. So what's happening now on the diplomatic front? So we've got the resolution language finally. We've only had the final, we've had the language. We've got the approval from all stages of government. We submitted 2 more changes just the other day. Everything is moving smoothly. I've got great news on the diplomatic front. On the diplomatic front, we have governments knocking. So we're basically doing front end diplomatic canvassing. We have, alhamdulillah, we have a very powerful team of folks who are on constant contact and outreach. And as a result of this, we were able to have one state. I'm not going to name the states, but I will say that I'll allude to some of them. But we have one government that not only endorsed it immediately without seeing the text, but is also now looking at co-sponsoring and bringing this together. We expect more governments will come into co-sponsorship. We've had European states, other less friendly governments in other parts of the world messaging and saying, hey, can we talk? And we've also opened it up to engagement now. Engagement meaning edits, conversations, hammering out the fine details. Certainly, we have no time to waste. But at the same time, the reality is that there's a tremendous amount of pressure, folks. This does not go anywhere. The threat of sanctions, I'm not talking about Colombia. Colombia has no issues. A special thank you to the Honorable President Gustavo Petro, who today, I don't know if folks have seen, sent a direct message to Trump and said, if you're thinking about bringing an army, our army's going down with you. The Colombian government is full steam ahead. We just need to make sure that other governments and enough governments feel strong enough to press ahead. The response so far, a great deal of positive interest. When I tell you, PAL Commission's team, legal and diplomatic team, has contacted the full spectrum, right? All continents, with positive responses from all continents, positive interest from all continents, even on the heels of the Trump proposal. This is very, very critical. Nobody's saying full steam ahead, because it's not just, what are we looking at in terms of US sanctions and US reprisal, which could shift in light of what's happened today, right? Everything is moving quickly in light of what happened today. This could shift. But also, what, if any, reprisals are we going to see from Europe? But at the same time, we're seeing more bravery and interest from European states who have been cowed on a few issues, including joining the Hague Group. What we saw happen last week with Spain joining the Hague Group is, in my opinion, an indicator of where we're moving to. More important than that, I would say the Global Samud Flotilla was a brilliant example on how to overwhelm Israeli resources to allow a peaceful intervention, multi-state intervention. Let's begin with bringing in the humanitarian aid. Global Samud Flotilla, Turkish Captain Muhammad, on the Mykonos boat, that move, as they were short for resources. I think that's very apparent. And if you look into US capacity for resources, as well as Israeli capacity at resources, this becomes really critical in terms of the world looking at the Uniting for Peace resolution and saying, well, can we do this intervention? Because, right, the UN says it's fine, but it's not the UN that authorizes the intervention. It's states who come together and then say, we're going to do it. And we've had states offer up on that level. Do you want to hold it? Okay, sorry. We have had states offer up on that level. More good news is the Italian dock workers, our brilliant team, Yafa and Ayman Khawaja, were able to secure an agreement from the Italian dock workers to adopt the endorsement of the Uniting for Peace resolution when it is brought to be a condition, i.e. we will strike if the Italian government or not enough governments, we don't have the exact language, we're waiting for that to come, but we have preliminary and firm agreement of this. Timing, look, you know, when we were dealing, we've done other webinars on this, and it's always a tension, right? Because as attorneys who do this sort of work, we understand, you know, I mean, do this work before working on the genocide. We've done this sort of work. We understand all of the considerations that any government has to make. And the issue of timing really is dependent on where we're at. We're not far off. I can't say when we'll propose it, but I can say now we're getting almost to the point where we have enough, because you know, I don't remember who said, oh, we don't have to wait for an overwhelming majority, but we do have to wait. I mean, we don't want to get in there and flop, right? And there's always chance of that given the pressures, especially given that Arab states were endorsing wholeheartedly the Trump proposal up until Netanyahu's edits, right? This is not something to be taken lightly. If we can't get a lot of the states who should and normally would endorse this to jump on board or not, that's a problem. I'm sorry, we don't believe in just jumping in. We have to lay the groundwork. And all of you, and you, Hazemi, have been doing a fantastic job on this, right? all of you become very critical to normalizing this demand. I think the trickiest part for us is not the diplomatic work. That's easy. That's our wheelhouse. It's one-on-one. We know how this goes. The harder part is getting people all over the world to have short talking points and making this the top of every protest. We're doing that with all of our folks and all, you know, we work on all levels of society. Adrian Pine from Friends of the Hague Group, organizations all over the world, Pal Auda in London, but really we need folks. Look, you know, when the United States was trying to shut down, I don't remember if it was being held in which European country, a conference on genocide. I think it was the winter of 2023 or the winter. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was the winter of 2023. This big, bad, huge US government couldn't get the conference to stop with a single phone call to this government, right? You know, what they had to do was dispatch all of their representatives to like 10 or 15 government offices 10 times a day, 30 times a month, right? This is a lot of pressure, right? We don't have the resources to do that. We should, we could, you know, maybe one day we will. But right now, what we need is we need people in civil society to be going, you know, every morning, knocking on the doors of the Spanish government. Every morning, I'm sorry, let me correct this. Every morning, every afternoon, every evening. Sit-ins and protests, right? Calls, emails, this single send an email, that does not suffice in this situation. Why? Because time is of the essence. Because time is of the essence, the pressure has to be much stronger, more consistent, much more relentless, and by as many people as possible. And people need to sit down and put together what are exactly the key talking points. Endorse it when it gets submitted. Contact, reach out to the Colombian government, reach out to whoever it is, give your preliminary endorsement, begin the conversation, go to your parliamentarian. It doesn't have to be, you can give them our contact. Amen will provide the contact, say, we want to have access, and begin the conversation. How do we do it? What questions do you have? People need to put that kind of pressure. And I'm sorry if I've gone on too long.
No, it's okay. I just want to make sure that we pull in some of the other questions. So
you got it. Yeah. I think when dark workers, I tried to answer some of the questions that had come up. When is soon? But when, folks, depends on you as much as possible. And when I say this needs to happen Monday. So would it be great if every organization, civil society, people individually started Monday doing all this every day, all day, showing up in person in every country, at every government office that they can around the world. I'll pause on that to take more questions or to however you want to manage it. I'm going to go on mute. Thank you, Hazemi, so much.
Thank you. No, and it's a very, very important, Habibti, thank you. It's a very important, I think, understanding, because people are really not understanding all these mechanisms. And so a lot of questions are being asked us to direct people to more information. This video, I know it's dense and high level. We will be posting it on our grid, and inshallah also being shared through the Global Samud Flotilla social accounts too. So we will post links with information. The goal of these conversations is not to talk at people. It's to actually engage you in better understanding how these mechanisms work and how we can galvanize public attention around them and public action around them, because knowing about them is not sufficient. It's knowing about them and doing something. And Craig, I want to come to you, and also, I don't know, it shows me that some of the cameras are rebuffering. So Arbeid, I'll come to you after. But Craig, there's a lot of questions here, and just in general, the feedback we've been getting while doing advocacy for the Waves to Gaza campaign also, and just wanted to acknowledge that we've had millions of people shut it down for Palestine. We launched the campaign a couple of weeks ago with calls from Gaza, asking for people to escalate with nonviolent civil disobedience. And boy, has the world answered. Inspired by the visual representation of courage to uphold international law taken by civilians willing to get on boats and physically go challenge Israel's violation of not only law, but violation of basic human decency. And so with that, a lot of people have been galvanized. But there's also something that we need to also talk about, which is people's mistrust in institutions, some misguided and some rightfully so. So Craig, coming to you, would love to get a sense from you for those that are saying, why should we continue to trust member states that have not taken action, not only in the last 2 years, but in the decades before. And what other mechanisms should we be focusing on? Or is it, in your opinion, that we should try to galvanize attention to very specific pressure points? So with that, over to you, Craig.
Well, after 2 years of a live stream genocide in which all states, with the very few exceptions, have sat on their hands and either watched idly or participated in the genocide, we would be fools to trust any governments. And that's not what we are proposing by any means. What we're talking about here is a mobilization to pressure governments that would otherwise likely be inactive or go very conveniently along with some of these more nefarious proposals because they're on the table, the French-Saudi proposal, the American proposal, and other things, because it's an easy way out. Just as we know, they always take the easy way out by recognizing the state of Palestine or talking about a two-state solution or talking about respect for humanitarian law, but not taking any concrete action. This is something that grew up really out of the experience of apartheid in South Africa, just as did the BDS movement and others. It's about global civil society, global movements pressuring governments to do the right thing because we know they will not do the right thing without that pressure. So it's not about trusting governments, right? So, and that's why it's also about holding them accountable, because we don't want them to allow them to make these deals behind the scene. We want them to be compelled to line up behind this proposal. That's why we need to be formally made. Now, I wish that there was something like the UN where we could mobilize armies without going through these obnoxious procedures, but there isn't, right? And so, there have been unarmed human rights monitors on the ground in Palestine for decades. They're important, sometimes even courageous. They have no deterrent power. They have no power to ensure the distribution of humanitarian aid. They have no power to affect the decisions that are made by the Israeli regime or by the Americans and so on. So that's why we are using this mechanism, because it exists, because it's possible, and because it's a way to mobilize effectively. It's called a UN protection force, just as it was a UN emergency force that was deployed by this mechanism in 1956. That's the only access that we have. We all think about the example of the citizens' brigades that deployed during the Spanish Civil War from countries around the world to fight against fascism. And we all have a duty to do what we can to fight against fascism at home and its manifestations in Palestine as well. But this is one of the ways that we do it, not out of trust for governments, but out of pressure on governments. That rhetorically, by the way, the vast majority of governments are out there saying, we support Palestine, we condemn the Israeli regime, we condemn what's happening in Gaza and so on. So they're out there not because governments are moral, they never are, never. But because they feel compelled to take that position, both because of domestic positions in their country, people are horrified, and the whole world is in solidarity with Palestine. Let's recognize that today, right? And because they know that also their diplomatic standing in the world also depends on supporting Palestine, particularly at this moment. So we want them to put their money where their mouth is. We know that won't happen on its own because they're not trustworthy. We know it takes pressure from the people. And everything meaningful that has happened over the course of the last 2 years has come not from these governments around the world, not from international institutions, but it has come from people. It has come from the people of Palestine and their resilience, from the resistance in Palestine and their courage. It has come from solidarity of people with Palestinians. So the people's encampments in university campuses, the people's demonstrations in capitals around the world, the people's march to Gaza across the Sinai, the people's flotillas, sailing so courageously as they continue to do, the people's tribunals that are adjudicating, not waiting for any official institutions on the crimes that are happening. And this is the people mobilized to press official institutions to take steps they would not otherwise take. So in answer to that question, no, do not trust any of these governments. They have their own interests. There are so many of these countries that rhetorically support Palestine, but still do business unlawfully under international law because they have tech deals and arms deals and trade deals with the Israeli regime and continue to do so even as they say the right thing. And the last thing I want to say about this is, we must not take our eye off the ball of the long-term struggle for Palestinian liberation. And that means this is not instead of BDS. This is not instead of civil disobedience. This is not instead of massive mobilizations. This is in addition, and we're talking about a very short time frame here. This is a matter of a few weeks. If it does not happen now, this is the best moment in history for it actually to happen. People have been talking about protection for Palestine for decades. But now we've got the International Court of Justice provisional measures, the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice, the one-year deadline set by the General Assembly, its codification of the decisions of the International Court of Justice, universal horror at the famine, at the genocide, at the ethnic cleansing that is taking place all over Palestine, and the General Assembly reconvening at this moment. So this is an opportunity that we morally are obliged to try to take advantage of. And if we do not succeed in the next, really, we're talking a matter of a few weeks at most, then we move our attention to something else as well.
Correct. I think that that's a very great and strong call to action as we close in on our time together here. There's very powerful work that's being done. And, the big call out to the world right now is do not lose this momentum. We are in a historic place for Palestinian liberation. We have awakened the consciousness of the world in a way that we did not previously have the capacity and ability to galvanize this much outrage. But outrage does not liberate Palestine. It's action that comes from outrage that liberates Palestine. So the call here for everybody watching is amplify the voices of people. I don't know if I think Bisan Center sent a message saying they had to leave, but Obey, are you still here or did you have to hop off? I think he had another meeting. But I think amplify, very critical, amplify voices inside Palestine, inside Gaza. Make sure that people are bearing witness to this moment in history. Make sure that Palestinian voices are the center and continue to be the compass of all of our activism and our advocacy around the world. And there are amazing, brilliant people behind the scenes, three of whom I've been joined by today, but, people have been doing this work. Palestinians have been laboring in these institutions for decades, attempting to do the work. What's been missing is the global support to push these things and build the political, social, and economic pressure to force these systems to comply and to be responsive to the will of the people. So again, when people are oftentimes, and I'm just reflecting to some of the comments coming in here of saying, well, these systems have failed, we've also failed. And it's important to acknowledge we've failed at building the political pressure to where our voices mattered. And this is why my call is to continue to mobilize, no matter how big or how small. And the analogy I gave the other day was a splinter. Yesterday we were talking, I said a splinter with Francesca Albanese. I was talking about a splinter in your finger is tiny, but boy, does it hurt. And you can't just forget about it. You keep picking at it and picking at it and picking at it. And I invited everyone to be a splinter. And someone shared with me another analogy that I will share with you all right now, which is, if people think that small things cannot impact big systems, you've clearly never been in a dark room with a mosquito. That tiny little thing that just nags at you to the point that you have to get up and do something. Be a mosquito, be a splinter. We need to understand that this moment, Craig, thank you for putting that out here. The moment, if it escapes us, it escapes us. And what we have seen around the world with 500 plus cities mobilizing over the last couple of days, that mobilization is an invitation to lean in, not to say we've done our part and lean out. The end goal is liberation of Palestine, not just ending the genocide. And so I invite everyone to please follow the work of these amazing people. Again, really proud to have been joined by Obey Aboudi, the director of the Bisan Center for Research and Development and a member of the PNGO committee in Palestine. Lemis Deek, a brilliant Palestinian attorney and human rights advocate at the forefront of driving a lot of this forward, as you've heard from her. And Mr. Craig Mokhaiber, who's an international human rights attorney and former UN High Commissioner, human rights official at the UN. My name is Hazami Barmada. I am an advocate in the DC area. and also helping mobilize global grassroots support for activism. But this conversation is not over. It is just starting. So I invite you both to please, or all three of you to please share resources with us that we can distribute. And I invite everybody who's watching this to amplify everything you've heard here. Send it to 10 people. 10. That's all you've got to do. And then, as Lamise said, show up morning, day, and night. Be a mosquito. And Lamise, I think you want to close this out. You have something to say?
Oh, I don't want to close it out. I do want to thank you so much, Hazami. Your work has been absolutely brilliant. And so many people behind the scenes who are on this. I do want to just